Good afternoon, everybody. I am Sam, and you are listening to Chilliteracy, where today we've got some Algernon Blackwood stories coming up for you. Some very short stories. Is this Chilliteracy, a channel about growing hot peppers in mid-density housing areas? Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Amherst, for that sterling contribution. How are we all doing, apart from you? How's everyone else? Are we all good? I have, completely by accident, 12 stories that I have planned. We're not going to get through all of them because it's, 10-minute stories, but they take longer than 10 minutes to read. You're going to make that joke earlier, but the garage rang you. Great. Well, okay, you can be welcome too. Welcome in. But yeah, I've, by sheer coincidence, read 12 stories, and Lucy has furnished me with a D12, so I figured for at least some of these we can let the fates decide. There's closer to, I think, 26 that are under the banner of 10-minute stories in here. It's just an entire book of very short stories, which is great. But I figured I'd just roll a D12, see what comes up, and go from there. But before we get to that, how are you doing? You thought it was Chilliteracy, a podcast about going to see Tierra del Fuego in Chile. Thanks. Thank you. Twitch chatter Andy Pants 26. That's good. Okay. Roll for books? Yes, indeed. We are going to do that. I've basically spent the last couple of days just reading through some of these, and some of them are weird, not in the weird way that I'm used to. Some of these are more like, and it turns out this is actually mentioned in like an introduction to the book. Some of these are just basically Algernon Blackwood people watching, just sitting looking at people, like hanging out in a cafe, seeing some people, and just like recounting what he saw and like their conversation and stuff, which is fine. It's the sort of thing that I feel like I'm a little bit more used to now from, say, Mark Twain, who seemed to just have entire like missives that he'd sent into newspapers or whatever that's just, here's what I've been up to this week, but related in a humorous Mark Twain kind of way. And Blackwood seemed to have his own little bit of a crack at that. So some of these stories are humorous slices of life, matter-of-fact narratives born out from Blackwood's love of human observation, which, in that light, is kind of charming. I was reading them expecting something a little bit more, just in line, not necessarily, I want ghost stories, but just in line with, weird fiction and whatnot. So I was a little bit, wrong-footed, I guess, to find some of these. So those aren't ones that I have included in this list. But none of this is to dismiss them or say that they are bad. You hope everyone went to see the Shooting Stars. Who went to see the Shooting Stars got to see them. You saw a couple. I tried taking. I think Lucy and I. What she said there. Sadly, no aurora. Yeah, there wasn't any visible aurora borealis going on outside at that time. No, I'm not going to do the Simpsons bit. That I tried taking a couple of long exposure photos to see if that brought up anything, and there was an extremely faint green tint to a couple of the photos that I took in places, but I couldn't tell if that's just me looking for it. You physically restrained yourself from also doing it. I mean, it's compulsion. We have to do it. You didn't see a shooting star or an aurora borealis. Well, that's just sad. Yeah, I didn't get to see it earlier in the year either, because where I was had a lot of light and there was nothing to see outside apart from clouds. So that was sad. But yeah, I don't know. One time you had aurora recent years, slightly pinkish in your phone camera. Underwhelming. Yeah, that's kind of been well, that's frankly still, I think, more than I got to see. I guess I took a couple of photos that looked ever so slightly pink, but again, because of where I live most of the time, it could have just been streetlights. But no, that's my elbow. Yeah. No, you just have a noise. Sorry, I bonked my elbow on the desk, and Lucy wished to know if I am okay. I'm fine. It's just a loud desk. Yeah, I don't know. Should we crack on? Should we roll the dice and see what we get first? There's a couple that I do want to do, so I might, we're in charge here, chat. The fates do not decide. Except in this case, where they've decided on number 6. Oh, okay, we're starting with that one. All right, let's start with one. Let's start with one. He says, "I know what the story is." Oh, I need a text. I need to give you a text. 1 second, I will do that. Yeah, I'm not going to be individually linking to each story because they're all in the same book. Hey Lucy, do you mind if I close your tabs? Gutenberg 10-minute stories. There we go. Right. So this is just going to be linked once at the top of chat. Yes, excuse helicopter. Maybe it's 10 minute stories and the man just can't count. I don't know. Yeah, we have the windows open because it won. What is the book? There is the book. The book is 10-minute stories. Or yes, perhaps 10 minute stories. Who knows? I'm saying that like someone else in chat is making the joke. No, that's a me original. Right, some more. So, Lo-Fi, Algernon Blackwood, The Work and Study too. Yeah, exactly. So, this first one, which you will find linked there in the index for the link at the top of the chat there, is story number 13. It is called Her Birthday. It was her birthday on the morrow, and I set forth to find a suitable and worthy present. My means, judged by the standards of the big merchants, seemed trivial, yet, could I but discover the right gift, no matter how insignificant, I felt sure that it would please her, and so make me doubly happy. And the kind of gift I already knew, for I had a specimen of it in my humble lodgings, only of so poor a type that I was ashamed to offer it. I must find somewhere a much, much better one, if possible, perfect and without a single flaw. I went, therefore, into the great shops and saw 1,000 wonderful and lovely things. So particular was I, however, and so difficult to suit, that I wearied the salesfolk and began to feel despondent. All that they showed me was so wrong, so cheap. In the matter of actual expense there was no disagreement, for I mentioned plainly beforehand the price that I would pay, or rather that I was prepared to pay. But in the nature and quality of the goods there was no satisfying me at all. Everything that they spread before my eyes seemed ordinary, trifling, even spurious. Marvellously fashioned, and of the most costly description, they yet seemed somewhere counterfeit. The goods were sham. Already she possessed far better. There was nowhere, and I went to the very best emporiums where the rich and favoured of the world bought their offerings. There was nowhere the little genuine thing I sought. The finest that was set before me seemed unworthy. I compared one and all with the specimen, broken yet authentic, that I had at home. And even the cleverest of the salesfolk was unable to deceive me, because I knew. "And this, for instance?" I asked at length, far from content, yet thinking it might just do, perhaps, in place of anything better I could find. "How much is this magnificent jewelled thing, with its ingenious little surprise, for each day in the entire year?" "You mentioned £10,000,000, sir," said the man obsequiously, while he eyed me with a close and questioning glance. 10 million only? And I laughed in his face. "And that was the price you named, sir," he murmured. I drew myself up, looking disdainfully, pityingly at him, and though he met my eye, he hesitated. Over his tired features there stole a soft and marvellous expression. Something more tender than starlight shone in his little eyes, and as he answered, in a gentle voice that was almost a whisper, I saw him smile, as a man may smile when he understands a divine, unutterable thing. Glory touched him for an instant with high radiance, and a hint of delicious awe hid shyly in his voice. I barely caught the words, so low he murmured them. "I fear, sir, that what you want is not to be had at all in our establishment. You will hardly find it. It is not in the market." He seemed to bow his head in reverence a moment. "It is not for sale." And so I went back to my dingy lodgings, having made no single purchase. I looked fondly at my own little specimen, trying to imagine it had somehow gained in value, in beauty, almost in splendour. At least, I said to myself, it is not spurious. It is real. And, sitting down to my table, I dipped my broken pen into a penny bottle of inferior ink and began my birthday letter. "This is your birthday, dear, and I send you all my love." Being young, I underlined the words describing my little present, thinking to increase its value thus. But I did not complete the sentence, for there was another thing that I must find to send her, or she would be disappointed. And a birthday comes but once a year. But, again, though I already possessed a tiny specimen of this other thing I sought, it did not seem to me nearly good enough to offer. Though genuine, it was worn by frequent use. Its lustre had dimmed a little, for I touched it daily. It seemed too ordinary and common for a special present. I was ashamed to send it. So I set out again and searched in every likely and unlikely place, even groping in the dark about the altars of the churches where I found by chance the doors ajar, and penetrating to those secret shrines where those who seek truth, it is said, go in to pray. For I knew that there was this other little present from me that she would look for, because she had need of it. And my search was wonderful and full of high adventure, yet so long that the moon had drawn the hood over the door of her silver tent, and the stars were fading in the east behind the towers of the night before I returned home, footsore, aching, empty-handed, and very humble in my heart. For nowhere had I been able to find this other little thing she would be pleased to have from me. To my amazement, yet to my secret joy, I found nothing better than what I had at home. Nothing, that is, indubitably genuine. In quantity, it was not anywhere for sale. It was more rare than I had guessed, and I felt delicious triumph in me. I sat down, humble, reverent, but incommunicably proud and happy to my unfinished letter. Unless I posted it immediately, she would not get it when she woke upon her birthday morning. I finished it. I posted it just as it was, brief, the writing a little shaky, the paper cheap, blot, smudge, and all. And my worship. And then, like a scrap of paper that enclosed the other gifts, yet need not be noticed unless she wished it, I added, above the little foolish name she knew me by, another tiny present, all that I had brought into the world or could take out with me again when I left it. I wrote, "Yours, ever faithfully." The end. Don't worry, I got the bot there. I could see that I was nearing the end of the story and didn't want to distract myself before the end. So there you go. Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's lovely. That's yeah. I was going to do that one in the middle of things, but, the dice has decided that number 6 shall come up first, so we got that one first, which, yeah, it's really sweet. I like that one. And, if nothing else, I appreciate the guy showing a bit of sensitivity. because again, it's like, oh, a lot of manly men writing spooky stories of horrors and ghosts and things like that, and it's like, nah, let's just write something sweet and considerate and soft and gentle. It's nice. But if we're done, we can move on to the next one. What say you, dice? Number 1. Alright. Okay, well then. No worries, Lynn, it's alright. You feel that Blackwood isn't a manly men kind of guy, to be honest? Yeah, absolutely. Like, he seems like a fascinating figure, and someone who I'm probably going to have to seek up some more stuff on him and his life, because yeah, Lucy's on the phone at the moment, so it's a lot easier for me to just like hit the box if I look up and see him. So yeah, don't worry about it if they pop up. We'll get it. But yeah, no, like he seems like a genuinely fascinating person. Like I think one of the first things I saw about him when first looking him up was that he worked in broadcasting, which is not a huge revelation, but yeah, that was a thing that I remember, and was reading today how again in like the introduction to this book written by Mike Ashley, who's someone whose work I need to look up because he seems like something of a Blackwood scholar. It talks about how he experienced the horrors of World War I firsthand, not as a serving soldier, but as an intelligence agent and then as a searcher for the Red Cross. This involved interviewing wounded soldiers in the hope of learning about those who were missing. It was distressing work and seriously affected Blackwood's own psychological and spiritual demeanour. So, like, which, yeah, I seemingly that came, I think, after a number of these were written, in terms of like the impact on him. But yeah, that's going to be a thing that affects you and changes your outlook on life. But yeah, he seems like a cool and interesting figure. But the more I talk about him, the less of his we'll be able to read. So also I see that Andy Pants. Yeah, he might take you up on that. I guess we could always. I mean, again, it's mainly a problem for now where I'm sat at Lucy's computer. But yeah, I guess another sword in chat wouldn't hurt. And we'll all hang on behind. Right, this next story is the first one actually in that compilation. It should be. It's called Accessory Before the Fact. And if everyone would like to take a minute, well, I'll give you all a second just to click on that before I start, if you want. That name again, Accessory Before the Fact. Oh, is he also spiraling while gift shopping is relatable? Yes, absolutely. I've gone to the shop to find a present for someone. Oh no, we're halfway through the day. I have found no present. Oh dear. I have been there. It sucks. But yes, this next one is called Accessory Before the Fact. At the moorland crossroads, Martin stood examining the signpost for several minutes in some bewilderment. The names on the 4 arms were not what he expected. Distances were not given, and his map, he concluded with impatience, must be hopelessly out of date. Spreading it against the post, he stooped to study it more closely. The wind blew the corners flapping against his face. The small print was almost indecipherable in the fading light. It appeared, however, as well as he could make out, that 2 miles back he must have taken the wrong turning. He remembered that turning. The path had looked inviting. He had hesitated a moment, then followed it, caught by the usual lure of walkers that it might prove a shortcut. The shortcut snare is old as human nature. For some minutes he studied the signpost and the map alternately. Dusk was falling, and his knapsack had grown heavy. He could not make the 2 guides tally, however, and a feeling of uncertainty crept over his mind. He felt oddly baffled, frustrated. His thought grew thick. Decision was most difficult. I'm muddled, he thought. I must be tired. As, at length, he chose the most likely arm. Sooner or later it would bring me to an inn, though not the one I intended. He accepted his walker's luck, and started briskly. The arm read, Over Literacy Hill, in small, fine letters that danced and shifted every time he looked at them, but the name was not discoverable on the map. It was, however, inviting like the shortcut. a similar impulse again directed his choice, only this time it seemed more insistent, almost urgent. And he became aware then of the exceeding loneliness of the country about him. The road for 100 yards went straight, then curved like a white river running into space. The deep blue-green of heather lined the banks, spreading upwards through the twilight, and occasional small pines stood solitary here and there, all unexplained. The curious adjective, having made its appearance, haunted him. So many things that afternoon were similarly unexplained. The shortcut, the darkened map, the names on the signpost, his own erratic impulses, and the growing strange confusion that crept upon his spirit. The entire countryside needed explanation, though perhaps interpretation was the truer word. Those little lonely trees had made him see it. Why had he lost his way so easily? Why did he suffer vague impressions to influence his direction? Why was he here? Exactly here? And why did he go now over Chilliteracy Hill? Then, by a green field that shone like a thought of daylight amid the darkness of the moor, he saw a figure lying in the grass. It was a blot upon the landscape, a mere huddled patch of dirty rags, yet with a certain horrid picturesqueness too, and his mind, though his German was of the schoolroom order, at once picked out the German equivalents against the English. Lump and lumpen flashed across his brain most oddly. They seemed in that moment right, and so expressive, almost like onomatopoeic words, if that were possible of sight. Neither rags nor rascal would have fitted what he saw. The adequate description was in German. Here was a clue tossed up by the part of him that did not reason, but it seems he missed it. And the next minute the tramp rose to a sitting posture and asked the time of evening. In German he asked it, and Martin, answering without a second's hesitation, gave it also in German. 6:30, 6:30. The instinctive guess was accurate. A glance at his watch when he looked a moment later proved it. He heard the man say, with the covert insolence of tramps, "Thank you, much obliged." For Martin had not shown his watch, another intuition subconsciously obeyed. He quickened his pace along that lonely road, a curious jumble of thoughts and feelings surging through him. He had somehow known the question would come, and come in German, yet it flustered and dismayed him. Another thing had also flustered and dismayed him. He had expected it in the same queer fashion. It was right. For when the ragged brown thing rose to ask the question, a part of it remained lying on the grass. Another brown, dirty thing. There were two tramps, and he saw both faces clearly. Behind the untidy beards, and below the old slouch hats, he caught the look of unpleasant, clever faces that watched him closely while he passed. The eyes followed him. For a second he looked straight into those eyes so that he could not fail to know them, and he understood, quite horridly, that both faces were too sleek, refined, and cunning for those of ordinary tramps. The men were not really tramps at all. They were disguised. How covertly they watched me, was his thought as he hurried along the darkening road, aware in dead earnestness now of the loneliness and desolation of the moorland all about him. Uneasy and distressed, he increased his pace. Midway in thinking what an unnecessarily clanking noise his nailed boots made upon the hard white road, there came upon him with a rush together the company of these things that haunted him as unexplained. They brought a single, definite message, that all this business was not really meant for him at all, and hence his confusion and bewilderment, that he had intruded into someone else's scenery, and was trespassing upon another's map of life. By some wrong inner turning he had interpolated his person into a group of foreign forces which operated in the little world of someone else. Unwittingly, Somewhere he had crossed the threshold and was now fairly in, a trespasser, an eavesdropper, a peeping Tom. He was listening, peeping, overhearing things he had no right to know because they were intended for another. Like a ship at sea, he was intercepting wireless messages he could not properly interpret because his receiver was not accurately tuned into their reception. And more, these messages were warnings. Then fear dropped upon him like the night. He was caught in a net of delicate, deep forces he could not manage, knowing neither their origin nor purpose. He had walked into some huge psychic trap elaborately planned and baited, yet calculated for another than himself. Something had lured him in, something in the landscape, the time of day, his mood. Owing to some undiscovered weakness in himself, he had been easily caught. His fear slipped easily into terror. What happened next happened with such speed and concentration that it all seemed crammed into a moment. At once, and in a heap, it happened. It was quite inevitable. Down the white road to meet him, a man came swaying from side to side in drunkenness quite obviously feigned. A tramp. And while Martin made room for him to pass, the lurch changed in a second to attack, and the fellow was upon him. The blow was sudden and terrific, yet even while it fell, Martin was aware that behind him rushed a second man, who caught his legs from under him and bore him with a thud and crashed to the ground. Blows rained then. He saw a gleam of something shining. A sudden, deadly nausea plunged him into utter weakness where resistance was impossible. Something of fire entered his throat, and from his mouth poured a thick, sweet thing that choked him. The world sank far away into darkness. Yet through all the horror and confusion ran the trail of two clear thoughts. He realized that the first tramp had sneaked at a fast double through the heather, and so come down to meet him, and that something heavy was torn from fastenings that clipped it tight and close beneath his clothes against his body. Abruptly, then, the darkness lifted, passed utterly away. He found himself peering into the map against the signpost. The wind was flapping the corners against his cheek, and he was poring over names that now he saw quite clear. Upon the arms of the signpost above were those he had expected to find, and the map recorded them quite faithfully. All was accurate again, and as it should be. He read the name of the village he had meant to make. It was plainly visible in the dusk, 2 miles the distance given. Bewildered, shaken, unable to think of anything, he stuffed the map into his pocket unfolded, and hurried forward like a man who had just wakened from an awful dream that had compressed into a single second all the detailed misery of some prolonged, oppressive nightmare. He broke into a steady trot that soon became a run. The perspiration poured from him. His legs felt weak, and his breath was difficult to manage. He was only conscious of the overpowering desire to get away as fast as possible from the signpost at the crossroads, where the dreadful vision had flashed upon him. For Martin, accountant on a holiday, had never dreamed of any world of psychic possibilities. The entire thing was torture. It was worse than a cooked balance of the books that some conspiracy of clerks and directors proved at his innocent door. He raced as though the countryside ran crying at his heels, and always still ran with him the incredible conviction that none of this was really meant for himself at all. He had overheard the secrets of another. He had taken the warning for another into himself, and so altered its direction. He had thereby prevented its right delivery. It all shocked him beyond words. It dislocated the machinery of his just and accurate soul. The warning was intended for another, who could not, would not, now receive it. The physical exertion, however, brought at length a more comfortable reaction and some measure of composure. With the lights in sight, he slowed down and entered the village at a reasonable pace. The inn was reached, a bedroom inspected and engaged, and supper ordered, with the solid comfort of a large bass to satisfy an unholy thirst and complete the restoration of balance. The unusual sensations largely passed away, and the odd feeling that anything in his simple, unwholesome world required explanation was no longer present. Still with a vague uneasiness about him, though actual fear quite gone, he went into the bar to smoke an after-supper pipe and chat with the natives, as his pleasure was upon a holiday, and so saw two men leaning upon the counter at the far end with their backs towards him. He saw their faces instantly in the glass, and the pipe nearly slipped from between his teeth. Clean-shaven, sleek, clever faces, and he caught a word or two as they talked over their drinks. German words. Well-dressed they were, both men, with nothing about them calling for particular attention. They might have been two tourists holiday-making like himself, in tweeds and walking boots, and they presently paid for their drinks and went out. He never saw them face to face at all, but the sweat broke out afresh all over him. A feverish rush of heat and ice together ran about his body. Beyond question he recognized the two tramps, this time not disguised. Not yet disguised. He remained in his corner without moving, puffing violently at an extinguished pipe, gripped helplessly by the return of that first vile terror. It came again to him with an absolute clarity of certainty that it was not with himself they had to do, these men, and, further, that he had no right in the world to interfere. He had no locus standi at all. It would be immoral, even if the opportunity came. And the opportunity, he felt, would come. He had been an eavesdropper, and had come upon private information of a secret kind that he had no right to make use of, even that good might come, even to save a life. He sat on in his corner, terrified and silent, waiting for the thing that should happen next. But night came without explanation. Nothing happened. He slept soundly. There was no other guest at the inn but an elderly man, apparently a tourist like himself. He wore gold-rimmed glasses, and in the morning Martin overheard him asking the landlord what direction he should take for Chilliteracy Hill. His teeth began then to chatter, and a weakness came to his knees. "You turn to the left at the crossroads," Martin broke in before the landlord could reply. "You'll see the signpost about 2 miles from here, and after that it's a matter of 4 miles more." How in the world did he know? Flashed horribly through him. "I'm going that way myself," he was next saying. "I'll go with you for a bit, if you don't mind." The words came out impulsively and ill-considered. Of their own accord they came. For his own direction was exactly opposite. He did not want the man to go alone. The stranger, however, easily evaded his offer of companionship. He thanked him with the remark that he was starting later in the day. They were standing, all three, beside the horse trough in front of the inn when, at the very moment, a tramp, slouching along the road, looked up and asked the time of day. And it was the man with the gold-rimmed glasses who told him. "Thank you, much obliged," the tramp replied, passing on with his slow, slouching gait, while the landlord, a talkative fellow, proceeded to remark upon the number of Germans that lived in England, and were ready to swell the Teutonic invasion for which he, for his part, deemed imminent. But Martin heard it not. Before he had gone a mile upon his way, he went into the woods to fight his conscience all alone. His feebleness, his cowardice was surely criminal. Real anguish tortured him. A dozen times he decided to go back upon his steps, and a dozen times the singular authority that whispered he had no right to interfere prevented him. How could he act upon knowledge gained by eavesdropping? How interfere in the private business of another's hidden life merely because he had overheard, as at the telephone, its secret dangers? Some inner confusion prevented straight thinking altogether. The stranger would merely think him mad. He had no facts to go upon. He smothered 100 impulses, and finally went on his way with a shaking, troubled heart. The last 2 days of his holiday were ruined by doubts and questions and alarms, all justified later when he read of the murder of a tourist upon Literacy Hill. The man wore gold-rimmed glasses and carried in a belt about his person a large sum of money. His throat was cut, and the police were hard upon the trail of a mysterious pair of tramps, said to be Germans. The end, and our apologies to Germany for your participation in this story. I'm not entirely sure how relevant it is that the tramps who commit, men disguised as tramps who commit a violent assault are German, other than to give them some kind. Yeah, the horrors of bilinguality. I know. Yeah, it's. It's a story, but other than to give them some kind of distinctive accent for our protagonist to overhear and go, oh, "Good heavens, it's them!" It kind of feels like they could have been anything. My God. But there we go. As I say, sorry, Germany. We do not mean to. We certainly don't mean to typecast. Right, let's go on to the next one. We've done 2. Let me cross out the 2 that we have done. We have done, for anyone showing up as well. Yeah. You like the sentence? His thoughts went thick. There's I love the way Blackwood writes and describes things. Again, there's just a real. It indicates to me an interesting mind behind them, someone. I guess the implied thought process. Essentially what is. I'm losing my words and tripping over things now. But yeah, I guess the thought process that is implied by the end sentence in order to reach that sentence, it's an interesting one to me. It's it seems to imply an interesting person behind it, who is coming up, who's viewing things these way and finding these ways to describe thoughts and feelings and moods and atmospheres and stuff, which is what's drawn me here in the first place, is why I like his work so much. I like the way he describes things. It's the simplest way to put it. But let's get another story in. Number 1. No, you can't have that dice. We've already done that one. Let's roll again. Number 6. Hey, I can't complain. I got you these dice. But okay, so we've had number 1 and number 6 again. Number 2. Right. Okay, let's just go in. Yeah, sure. Okay. Right. Excuse me, let's have another one. This story is the second one on the pinned link at the top. Or it should be, excuse me, burping. Yeah, I'm getting all the bad rolls out of the way, don't worry, we've got crits all the way out. Are you being eaten by a cat? Hello, Sherlock. Yeah, the index finger is delicious to a teething cat. I hope that Sherlock as well. Right, let us go on to the next story. This one should be the second. It is called The Deferred Appointment. So if you all would like to click onto that, if you are reading along, you are welcome to it. Hello, welcome back, Amherst in the garage. Ooh, a garage. Na-di-da, Mr. Frenchman. What do you call it? A car hole. There we go, that's the whole bit. So that no one feels to call and response it in chat. Right. It's a Simpsons reference, don't worry. Right, this... Thank you, back from the car hole, there we go. This is The Deferred Appointment. The little photographic studio in the side street beyond Shepherd's Bush had done no business all day, for the light had been uninviting to even the vainest sitter, and the murky sky that foreboded snow had hung over London without a break since dawn. Pedestrians went hurrying and shivering along the pavements, disappearing into the gloom of countless ugly little houses the moment they passed beyond the glare of the big electric standards that lit the thundering motor buses in the main street. The first flakes of snow, indeed, were already falling slowly, as though they shrank from settling in the grime. The wind moaned and sang dismally, catching the ears and lifting the shabby coattails of Mr. Mortimer Jenkin, photographic artist, as he stood outside and put the shutters up with his own cold hands in despair of further trade. It was 5 minutes to 6. With a lingering glance at the enlarged portrait of a fat man in Masonic regalia, who was the pride and glory of his window front, he fixed the last hook of the shutter and turned to go indoors. There was developing and framing to be done upstairs, not very remunerative work, but better at any rate than waiting in an empty studio for customers who did not come, wasting the heat of 2 oil stoves into the bargain. And it was then, in the act of closing the street door behind him, that he saw a man standing in the shadows of the narrow passage, staring fixedly into his face. Mr. Jenkin admits that he jumped. The man was so very close, yet he had not seen him come in, and in the eyes was such a curiously sad and appealing expression. He had already sent his assistant home, and there was no other occupant of the little 2-story house. The man must have slipped past him from the dark street while his back was turned. Who in the world could he be, and what could he want? Was he beggar, customer, or rogue? "Good evening," Mr. Jenkin said, washing his hands, but using only half the oily politeness of tone with which he favoured sitters. He was just going to add, "Sir," feeling it wiser to be on the safe side, when the stranger shifted his position so that the light fell directly upon his face, and Mr. Jenkin was aware that he recognized him. Unless he was greatly mistaken, it was the second-hand bookseller in the main street. Oh, it's you, Mr. Wilson," he stammered, making half a question of it, as though not quite convinced. "Pardon me, I did not quite catch your face. I was just shutting up." The other bowed his head in reply. "Won't you come in? Do, please." Mr. Jenkin led the way. He wondered what was the matter. The visitor was not among his customers. Indeed, he could hardly claim to know him, having only seen him occasionally when calling at the shop for slight purchases of paper and what not. The man, he now realized, looked fearfully ill and wasted, his face pale and haggard. It upset him rather, this sudden, abrupt call. He felt sorry, pained. He felt uneasy. Into the studio they passed, the visitor going first as though he knew the way, Mr. Jenkin noticing through his flurry that he was in his Sunday best. Evidently he had come with a definite purpose. It was odd. Still, without speaking, he moved straight across the room and posed himself in front of the dingy background of painted trees facing the camera. The studio was brightly lit. He seated himself in the faded armchair, crossed his legs, drew up the little round table with the artificial roses upon it in a tall, thin vase, and struck an attitude. He meant to be photographed. His eyes, staring straight into the lens, draped as it was with the black velvet curtain, seemed, however, to take no account of the photographic artist. But Mr. Jenkin, standing still beside the door, felt a cold air playing over his face that was not merely the winter cold from the street. He felt his hair rise. A slight shiver ran down his back. In that pale, drawn face, and in those staring eyes across the room that gazed so fixedly into the draped camera, he read the signature of illness that no longer knows hope. It was death that he saw. In a flash, the impression came and went, less than a second. The whole business, indeed, had not occupied 2 minutes. Mr. Jenkin pulled himself together with a strong effort, dismissed his foolish obsession, and came sharply to practical considerations. "Forgive me," he said, a trifle thickly, confusedly. "But I did not quite realize. You desire to sit for your portrait, of course. I've had such a busy day, and hardly looked for a customer so late." The clock, as he spoke, struck 6, but he did not notice the sound. Through his mind ran another reflection. A man shouldn't have his picture taken when he's ill and next door to dying. Lord, he'll want to have a touching up and finishing too. He began discussing the size, price, and length, the usual rigmarole of his profession, and the other, sitting there, still vouchsafed no comment or reply. He simply made the impression of a man in a great hurry who wished to finish a disagreeable business without unnecessary talk. Many men, reflected the photographer, were the same. Being photographed was worse to them than going to the dentist. Mr. Jenkin filled the pauses with his professional running talk and patter, while the sitter, fixed and motionless, kept his first position and stared at the camera. The photographer rather prided himself upon his ability to make sitters look bright and pleasant, but this man was hopeless. It was only afterwards Mr. Jenkin recalled the singular fact that he never once touched him. That, in fact, something connected possibly with his frail appearance of deadly illness had prevented his going close to arrange the details of the hastily assumed pose. "It must be a flashlight, of course, Mr. Wilson," he said, fidgeting at length with a camera stand, shifting it slightly nearer, while the other moved his head gently yet impatiently in agreement. Mr. Jenkin longed to suggest his coming another time when he looked better, to speak with sympathy of his illness, to say something, in fact, that might establish a personal relation. But his tongue, in this respect, seemed utterly tied. It was just this personal relation which seemed impossible to approach, absolutely and peremptorily impossible. There seemed a barrier between the two. He could only chatter the usual professional commonplaces. To tell the truth, Mr. Jenkin thinks he felt a little dazed the whole time, not quite his usual self, and meanwhile his uneasiness oddly increased. He hurried. He, too, wanted the matter done with, and his visitor gone. At length everything was ready, only the flashlight waiting to be turned on, when, stooping, he covered his head with the velvet cloth and peered through the lens. At no one. When he says, "at no one," however, he qualifies it thus. There was a quick flash of brilliant white light and a face in the middle of it. Oh, gracious heaven, but such a face! Him, yet not him, like a sudden rushing glory of a face. It shot off like lightning out of the camera's field of vision. It left me blinded, I assure you, half blinded, and that's a fact. It was sheer dazzling. It seems Mr. Jenkin remained entangled a moment in the cloth, eyes closed, breath coming in gasps, for when he got clear and straightened up again, staring once more at his customer over the top of the camera, he stared, for the second time, at no one. And the cap that he held in his hand, in his left hand, he clapped feverishly over the uncovered lens. Mr. Jenkin staggered, looked hurriedly round the empty studio, then ran, knocking a chair over as he went into the passage. The hall was deserted, the front door closed. His visitor had disappeared, almost as though he hadn't ever been there at all. Thus he described it to himself in a terrified whisper. And again he felt the hair rise on his scalp. His skin crawled a little, and something put back the ice against his spine. After a moment he returned to the studio and somewhat feverishly examined it. There stood the chair against the dingy background of trees, and there, close beside it, was the round table with the flower vase. Less than a minute ago, Mr. Thomas Wilson, looking like death, had been sitting in that very chair. It wasn't all a sort of dreaming then, ran through his disordered and frightened mind. I did see something. He remembered vaguely stories he had read in newspapers, stories of queer warnings that saved people from disasters, apparitions, faces seen in dream, and so forth. Maybe, he thought with confusion, something's going to happen to me. Further than that he could not get for some little time, as he stood there staring about him, almost expecting that Mr. Wilson might reappear as strangely as he had disappeared. He went over the whole scene again and again, reconstructing it in the minutest detail. And only then, for the first time, did he plainly realize two things which somehow or other he had not thought strange before, but now thought very strange. For his visitor, he remembered, had not uttered a single word, nor had he, Mr. Jenkin, once touched his person, and thereupon, without more ado, he put on his hat and coat and went round to the little shop in the main street to buy some ink and stationery, which he did not in the least require. The shop seemed all as usual, though Mr. Wilson himself was not visible behind the littered desk. A tall gentleman was talking in low tones to the partner. Mr. Jenkin bowed as he went in, then stood examining a case of cheap stylographic pens, waiting for the others to finish. It was impossible to avoid overhearing. Besides, the little shop had distinguished customers sometimes, he had heard, and this evidently was one of them. He only understood part of the conversation, but he remembers all of it. Singular, yes, these last words of dying men, the tall man was saying. Very singular. You remember Newman's. More light, wasn't it? The bookseller nodded. Fine, he said. Fine, that. There was a pause. Mr. Jenkin stooped lower over the pens. This, too, was fine in its way, the gentleman added, straightening up to go. The old promise, you see, unfulfilled but not forgotten, cropped up suddenly out of the delirium. Curious, very curious. A good, conscientious man to the last. In all the 20 years I've known him, he never broke his word. A motor bus drowned a sentence, and then was heard in the bookseller's voice, as he moved towards the door. You see, he was halfway down the stairs before they found him, always repeating the same thing. I promised the wife, I promised the wife. And it was a job, I'm told, getting him back again. He struggled so. That's what finished him so quick, I suppose. 15 minutes later he was gone, and his last words were always the same. I promised the wife. The tall man was gone, and Mr. Jenkin forgot about his purchases. When did it happen? He heard himself asking in a voice he hardly recognized as his own, and the reply roared and thundered in his ears as he went down the street a minute later to his house. Close on 6 o'clock, a few minutes before the hour. Been ill for weeks, yes. Caught him out of bed with high fever on his way to your place, Mr. Jenkin, calling at the top of his voice that he'd forgotten to see you about his picture being taken. Yes, very sad indeed. But Mr. Jenkin did not return to his studio. He left the light burning there all night. He went to the little room where he slept out, and next day gave the plate to be developed by his assistant. Defective plate, sir, was the report in due course. Shows nothing but a flash of light. Uncommonly brilliant. Make a print of it all the same, was the reply. 6 months later, when he examined the plate and print, Mr. Jenkin found that the singular streaks of light had disappeared from both. The uncommon brilliance had faded out completely, as though it had never been there. The end. I hope you all enjoyed the inclusion of a screaming sparrowhawk. Was that bombing past? That was cool. I was listening for you to get up. Yeah. Birds. There are noisy birds nearby, and this one wanted everybody to know that it was on its way. Right, that was The Deferred Appointment. Ghosts. But yeah, okay. We will. It is on the hour, just about 1 minute to. So we're gonna go to a break there, and I'll see you back here in about 5 minutes. So you, friends, have 5 minutes to do whatever you want to do. I mean, you have more than 5 minutes, frankly. Do whatever you want to do with your lives. There you go. There's an inspirational quote. But if you wish to come back for the second half of the stream, you have 5 minutes to stretch your limbs, cycle your fluids, do whatever the hell else you feel like, and we'll see you back here in a bit. Bye for now. everybody. Lucy has, I think, reached some sort of a stalemate in a battle of wits with a bee, but we may have a continuation of that, and we've turned the fan on because it's warm. So that's what's happened here. It's all exciting and go here in the break. But I hope that we are well and good. Right. How are we? You have again the same link at the top of chat. They're all coming from the same place. Although I've decided in the second half, there's like 4 that I do really want to read, and I will be frankly just hoping for the dice to bring those up. So you know what? It's my stream. This one in particular, Lucy and I share the duties, but this one's me. So I'm taking the wheel away from fate. You're now being eaten by mosquitoes. Yum. Eat the mosquitoes back. Show them. Assert dominance over the mosquitoes by eating them. But yeah, I have made a decision that I'm just going to read some instead. And so we're going to do that. Which, I guess, if we are somewhere in the region of back, we are so back, then I'm going to do that. And yes, if people want to watch Dave stream as well, then I guess you can do that. Yeah, you have a multi-Twitch link there in chat if you want to watch Dave as well. Like, there's no kind of coordination in the content, so it's probably going to be kind of weird. Listening to him doing quizzes as I read your stories, but you know, hey, maybe that's a vibe you're after. So who knows? But if we are ready, the next story that I'm going to read is called 2 in 1. It is story number 14 from 10 Minute Stories. It feels like a church service. If you would turn in your hymn books to story number 14, we shall now sing 2 in 1, and then an organist pipes up. But no. It wasn't an intended pun, but I kind of realised as I was saying it that as in all my things, it's accidental, but I live my life in such a way that it could maybe be intended. And that's my life advice to you all. But anyway, if we are ready with story number 14, it's called 2 in 1, and I shall begin. Some idle talker, playing with half-truths, had once told him that he was too self-centered to fall in love, out of himself. He was unwilling to lose himself in another, and that was the reason he had never married. But Lemaitre was not really more of an egoist than is necessary to make a useful man. A too selfless person is ever ineffective. The suggestion, nevertheless, had remains to distress, for he was no great philosopher, merely a writer of successful tales of wild nature. Chiefly, the human interest, a publisher's term, was weak. The great divine enigma of an undeveloped soul, certainly of a lover's or a woman's soul, had never claimed his attention enough, perhaps. He was somewhat too much detached from human life. Nature had laid so powerful a spell upon his heart. I hope she won't be late, ran the practical thought across his mind as he waited that early Sunday morning in the great central station, and reflected that it was the cleanest, brightest, and most airy terminus of all London. He had promised her the whole day out, a promise somewhat long neglected. He was not conscious of doing an unselfish act, yet on the whole, probably, he would rather, or just as soon, have been alone. The air was fragrant, and the sunshine blazed in soft white patches on the line. The maddening loveliness of an exceptional spring danced everywhere into his heart. Yes, he rather wished he were going off into the fields and woods alone, instead of with her. Only, she was really a dear person, far more now, than secretary and typist, more even than the devoted girl who had nursed him through that illness. A friend, she was. The years of their working together had made her that. And she was wise and gentle. Oh, yes, It would be delightful to have her with him. How she would enjoy the long sunny day. Then he saw her coming towards him through the station. In a patch of sunshine she came, as though the light produced her, came suddenly from the middle of a group of men in flannels carrying golf sticks, and he smiled his welcome a little paternally, excuse me, trying to kill the selfish thought that he would rather have been alone. Soft things fluttered about her. The big hat was becoming. She was dressed in brown, he believed. He bought a Sunday paper. "I must buy one too," she laughed. She chose one with pictures, chose it at random rather. He had never heard its name. And in a first-class carriage alone, he meant to do it really well, they raced through a world of sunshine and brilliant fields to Amersham. She was very happy. She tried every seat in turn. The blazing sheets of yellow, such a spring for buttercups there had never been, drew her from side to side. She put her head out and nearly lost her big hat, and the soft, fluttering thing she wore streamed behind her like the colour of escaping flowers. She opened both windows. The very carriage held the perfume of May that floated over the whole countryside. He was very nice to her, but read his paper, though always ready with a smile and answer when she asked him for them. She teased and laughed and chattered. The luncheon packages engaged her serious attention. Never for a moment was she still, trying every corner in turn, putting her feet up and bouncing to enjoy the softness of the first-class cushions. "You'll be sitting in the rack next," he suggested. But her head was out of the window again and she did not hear him. She was radiant as a child. His paper interested him, book reviews or something. "I've asked you that 3 times, you know, already," he heard her laughing opposite. And with a touch of shame he tossed the paper through the window. There, I'd quite forgotten her again, he thought with a touch of shame. I must pull myself together. For it was true. He had, for the moment, more than once, forgotten her existence, just as though he really were alone. Together they strolled down through the beech wood towards Amersham, he forever dropping the luncheon packages which she picked up again and tried to stuff into his pockets, for she refused to carry anything at all. "It's my day out, not yours, remember. I do no work today." And he caught her happiness, pausing to watch her while she picked flowers and leaves and all the rest, and disentangling with the least impatience that soft fluttering thing she wore when it caught in thorns, and even talking with her about this wild spring glory, as though she were just the companion that he needed out of all the world. He no longer felt quite so conscious of her objective presence as at first. In the train, for instance, he had felt so vividly aware that she was there. Alternately, he had forgotten and remembered her presence. Now it was better. They were more together, as it were. I wish I were alone, he thought once more as the beauty of the spring called to him tumultuously, and he longed to lie and dream it all, unhampered by another's presence. Then, even while thinking it, he realized that he was alone. It was curious. This happened even in their first wood when they went downhill into Amersham. As they left it and passed again into the open it came, and on its heels, as he watched her moving here and there, light-footed as a child or nymph, there came this other instinctive thought. I wish I were 10 years younger than I am. The first time in all his life, probably, that such a thought had ever bothered him. Apparently he said it aloud, laughingly, as he watched her dancing movements, for she turned and ran up to his side quickly, her little face quite grave beneath that big hat's rim. "You are!" That answer struck him as rather wonderful. Who was she, after all? And in Amersham they hired from the Griffin a rickety old cart, drawn by a still more rickety horse, to drive them to Penn's Woods. She, with her own money, bought stone-bottle ginger beer, 2 bottles. It made her day complete to have those bottles, though unless they had driven, she would have done without them. The street was deserted. drenched in blazing sunshine. Rooks were cawing in the elms behind the church. Not a soul was about as they crawled away from the houses and passed upwards between the hedges, smothered in cow parsley over the hill. She had kept her picture paper. It lay on her lap all the way. She never opened it or turned a single page, but she held it in her lap. They drove in silence. The old man on the box was like a faded, weather-beaten farmer dressed in somebody else's cast-off Sunday coat. He flicked the horse with a tattered whip. Sometimes he grunted. Plover rose from the fields. Cuckoos called. Butterflies danced sideways past the carriage, eyeing them. And as they passed through Penn Street, Lemaitre started suddenly and said something, for again he had quite forgotten she was there. What a selfish beast I am! Why can't I forget myself and my own feelings and look after her and make her feel amused and happy? It's her day out, not mine. This, somehow, was the way he put it to himself, just as any ordinary man would have put it. But when he turned to look at her, he received a shock. Here was something new and unexpected. With a thud, it dropped down into his mind. Crash. For at the sound of his voice, she looked up confused and startled into his face. She had forgotten him. For the first time in all the years together, years of work, of semi-official attention to his least desire, yet of personal devotion as well, because she respected him and thought him wonderful, she had forgotten he was there. She had forgotten his existence beside her as a separate person. She, too, had been alone. It was here, perhaps, he first realized the singular thing that set this day apart from every other that he had ever known. In reality, of course, it had come far sooner, begun with the exquisite spring dawn before either of them was awake, had tentatively fluttered about his soul even while he stood waiting for her in the station, come softly nearer all the way in the train, dropped threads of its golden web about him, especially in that first beech wood, then moved with its swifter yet unhurried rush, until, here, now, in this startling moment, he realized it fully. Thus steal those changes o'er the sky, perhaps, that the day itself knows at sunrise, but that unobservant folk do not notice till the sun bursts out with fuller explanation, and they say, "The weather's changed. How delightful! How unexpected!" The mate had never been observant very of people. And then, in this deep, lonely valley, too full of sunshine to hold anything else, it seemed they stopped where the beech woods trooped to the edge of the white road. No wind was here. It was still and silent. The leaves glittered motionless. They entered the thick trees together, she carrying the ginger beer bottles and that picture paper. He noticed that, the way she held it, almost clutched it, still unopened. Her face, he saw, was pale. Or was it merely the contrast of the shade? The trees were very big and wonderful. No birds sang. The network of dazzling sunshine patches in the gloom bewildered a little. At first they did not talk at all, and then in hushed voices, but it was only when they were some way into the wood, and she had put down the bottles, though not the paper, to pick a flower or spray of leaves, that he traced the singular secret thrill to its source, and understood why he had felt, no, not uneasy, but so strangely moved. For he had asked the sleepy driver of the way how they might best reach Beaconsfield Cross across these Penn woods, and the old man's mumbled answer took no note of her. "It's a bit rough, maybe on t'other side, stony like and steep, but that ain't nothing for a gentleman, when he's alone." The words disturbed him with a sense of darkness, yet of wonder, as though the old man had not noticed her, almost as though he had seen only one person, himself. They lunched among heather and bracken just beside a pool of sunshine. In front lay a copse of pines, with little beeches in between. The roof was thick just there, the stillness haunting. All the countryside, it seemed, this Sunday noon had gone to sleep. he and she alone left out of the deep, soft dream. He watched those pines, mothering the slim young beeches, the brilliant fresh green of whose lower branches, he thought, were like little platforms of level sunlight amid the general gloom, patches that had left the ground to escape by the upper air and had then been caught. "Look," he heard, "they make one think of laughter crept in unawares among a lot of solemn monks, or of children lost among grave elder beings whose ways are dull and sombre." It was his own thought continued, yet it was she, lying there beside him, who had said it. And all that wonderful afternoon she had this curious way of picking the thoughts out of his mind and putting them into words for him. "Look," she said again later, "you can always tell whether the wind loves a tree or not by the way it blows the branches. If it loves them, it tries to draw them out to go away with it. The others it merely shakes carelessly as it passes." It was the very thought of his own mind, too. Indeed, he had been on the point of saying it, but had desisted, feeling she would not understand, with the half-wish, though far less strong than before, that he were alone to enjoy it all in his own indulgent way. Then, even more swiftly, came that other strange sensation that he was alone all the time. More, that he was for the first time in his life most wonderfully complete and happy, all sense of isolation gone. He turned quickly the instant she had said it, but not quickly enough. By the look in her great grey eyes, by the expression on the face where the discarded hat no longer hid it, he read the same amazing enigma he had half divined before. She, too, was alone. She had forgotten him again, forgotten his presence, radiant and happy without him, enjoying herself in her own way. She had merely uttered her delightful thought aloud, as if speaking to herself. How the afternoon, with its long, sunny hours, passed so quickly away he never understood, nor how they made their way eventually to Beaconsfield through the other woods and over the meadows. He remembers only that the whole time he kept forgetting that she was with him, and then suddenly remembering it again. And once on the grass, when they had rested to drink the cold tea from his rather musty flask, he lit his pipe, and after a bit he dozed. He actually slept, for 10 minutes at her side. Yes, he slept. He heard her laughing at him, but the laughter was faint and very far away. It might just as well have been the wind in the cow parsley that said, "If you sleep, I will change you while you sleep." And for some minutes after he woke again, it hardly seemed queer to him that he did not see her, for when he noticed her coming towards him from the hedgerow, her arms full of flowers and things, he only thought, "Oh, there she is," as though her absence, or his own absence in sleep, were not quite the common absences of the world. And he remembered that on the walk to the village her shoe hurt her, and he offered to carry her, and that then she took off her shoe and ran along the grass beside the lane the whole way. But it was at the inn where they had their supper that the oddest thing of all occurred, for the servant girl would insist on laying the table on the lawn for one. "Oh, expecting someone, are you?" she said at last. "Is that it?" And so brought plates and knives for two. The girl never once looked at his companion, almost as though she did not see her and seemed unaware of her presence. Lemaitre began to feel that he was dreaming. This was a dream country, where the people had curious sight. He remembered the driver. In the dusk they made their way to the station. They spoke no word. He kept losing sight of her. Once or twice he forgot who she was, but the whole amazing thing blazed into him most strongly, showing how it had seized upon his mind, when he stood before the ticket window and hesitated, for a second, how many tickets he should buy. He stammered, at length, for 2 first class, but he was absurdly flustered for a second. It had actually occurred to him that they needed only 1 ticket. Then, suddenly in the train he understood, and his heart came up in his throat. They were alone. He turned to her where she lay in the corner, feet up, weary, crumpled among the leaves and flowers she had gathered. Like a hedgerow flower she looked, tired by the sunshine and the wind. In one hand was the picture paper, still unopened and unread, symbol of everyday reality. She was dozing, certainly, if not actually asleep. So he woke her with a touch, calling her name aloud. There were no words at first. He looked at her, coming up very close to do so, and she looked back at him, straight into his eyes, just as she did it at home when they were working and he was explaining something important. And then her own eyes dropped, and a deep blush spread over all her face. "I wasn't asleep, really," she said, as he took her at last into his arms. "I was wondering when you'd find out." "Come to myself, you mean?" he asked tremblingly. "Well," she hesitated as soon as she got her breath, "that I am yourself, and that you are me. Of course, we're really only one. I knew it years and years ago." The end. I like that one. I like that one a lot. I don't know if it's intended by Blackwood, but it feels a little bit queer, and I think that's great. She wasn't a ghost. She was him. And he was her. And it feels a little bit possibly like some kind of trans awakening. As I say again, I don't know if that was Blackwood's intent, but that's kind of how it reads to me, and I think that's good. Right, what's the time? Nearly 1:30. Well, let's bang on to another one. That was 2 in 1. Also a bit fey. Yeah, it's... Yeah, there are some... Oh no, because now I want to get caught up in the descriptions. But there are some really lovely descriptions of, like, summertime countryside in this. I was nearly dog-earing pages. What was it? Damn. I mean, just the whole thing, frankly. There's just a lot of really nice descriptions in this. No. I mean, it's a short story. We can just go back to it. Anyway, I'm just wasting time. Let's go on to another one. Entrance and exit. Sure, that's another one I've marked out. 97. Right, well, you heard the name there. The next one's called Entrance and Exit. It is 15... story number 18. That name again, if you wish to click and read along. Entrance and Exit. Number 18. These three, the old physicist, the girl, and the young Anglican parson who was engaged to her, stood by the window of the country house. The blinds were not yet drawn. They could see the dark clump of pines in the field, with crests silhouetted against the pale wintry sky of the February afternoon. Snow, freshly fallen, lay upon the lawn and hill. A big moon was already lighting up. "Yes, that's the wood," the old man said. "And it was this very day 50 years ago, February 13th, the man disappeared from its shadows, swept in this extraordinary, incredible fashion into invisibility, into some other place. Can you wonder the grove is haunted?" A strange impressiveness of manner belied the laugh following the words. "Oh, please tell us," the girl whispered. "We're all alone now." Curiosity triumphed. Yet a vague alarm betrayed itself in the questioning glance she cast for protection at her younger companion, whose fine face, on the other hand, wore an expression that was grave and singularly rapt. He was listening keenly. "As though nature," the physicist went on half to himself, "here and there concealed vacuums, gaps, holes in space." His mind was always speculative, more than speculative, some said, "through which a man might drop into invisibility. A new direction, in fact, at right angles to the three known ones. higher space, as Bolyai, Gauss, and Hinton might call it, and what you, with your mystical turn, looking towards the young priest, might consider a spiritual exchange of condition into a region where space and time do not exist, and where all dimensions are possible, because they are one. But please, the story, the girl begged, not understanding these dark sayings, although I'm not sure that Arthur ought to hear it. He's much too interested in such queer things as it is. Smiling, yet uneasy, she stood closer to his side, as though her body might protect his soul. Very briefly, then, you shall hear what I remember of this haunting, for I was barely 10 years old at the time. It was evening, clear and cold like this, with snow and moonlight, when someone reported to my father that a peculiar sound, variously described as crying, singing, wailing, was being heard in the grove. He paid no attention until my sister heard it too and was frightened. Then he sent a groom to investigate. Though the night was brilliant, the man took a lantern. We watched from this very window till we lost his figure against the trees, and the lantern stopped swinging suddenly, as if he had put it down. It remained motionless. We waited half an hour, and then my father, curiously excited, I remember, went out quickly, and I, utterly terrified, went after him. We followed his tracks, which came to an end beside the lantern, the last step being a stride almost impossible for a man to have made. All around the snow was unbroken by a single mark, but the man himself had vanished. Then we heard him calling for help, above, behind, beyond us, from all directions at once, yet from none, came the sound of his voice. But though we called back, he made no answer, and gradually his cries grew fainter and fainter, as if going into tremendous distance, and at last died away altogether. "And the man himself?" asked both listeners. "Never returned. From that day to this has never been seen. At intervals for weeks and months afterwards, reports came in that he was still heard crying, always crying for help. With time, even these reports ceased, for most of us," he added under his breath. "And that is all I know. A mere outline, as you see." The girl did not quite like the story, for the old man's manner made it too convincing. She was half disappointed, half frightened. "See, there are others coming home," she exclaimed with a note of relief, pointing to a group of figures moving over the snow near the pine trees. "Now we can think of tea." She crossed the room to busy herself with the friendly tray as the servant approached to fasten the shutters. The young priest, however, deeply interested, talked on with their host, though in a voice almost too low for her to hear. Only the final sentences reached her, making her uneasy, absurdly so, she thought, till afterwards. "For matter, as we know, interpenetrates matter," she heard, "and two objects may conceivably occupy the same space. The odd thing really is that one should hear, but not see. Yet that air waves should bring the voice, yet ether waves fail to bring the picture." And then the older man, "As if certain places in nature, yes, invited the change. Places where these extraordinary forces stir from the earth as from the surface of a living being with organs. Places like islands, mountain tops, pine woods, especially pines isolated from their kind. You know the queer results of digging absolutely virgin soil, of course, and that theory of the earth's being alive." The voice dropped again. "States of mind also helping the forces of the place," she caught the priest's reply in part, "such as conditions induced by music or intense listening, by certain moments in the Mass even, by ecstasy or— I say, what do you think?" cried a girl's voice as the others came in with welcome chatter and odours of tweeds and open fields. "As we passed your old haunted pinewood, we heard such a queer noise, like someone wailing or crying. Caesar howled and ran, and Harry refused to go in and investigate. He positively funks it." They all laughed. "More like a rabbit in a trap than a person crying," explained Harry, a blush kindly concealing his startling pallor. "I wanted my tea too much to bother about an old rabbit." It was some time after tea when the girl became aware that the priest had disappeared, and putting two and two together, ran in alarm to her host's study. Quite easily, from the hastily opened shutters, they saw this figure moving across the snow. The moon was very bright over the world, yet he carried a lantern that shone pale yellow against the white brilliance. "Oh, for God's sake, quick!" she cried, pale with fear. "Quick, or we're too late! Arthur's simply wild about such things. Oh, I might have known, I might have guessed. And this is the very night. I'm terrified." By the time he had found his overcoat and slipped round the house with her from the back door, the lantern they saw was already swinging close to the pine wood. The night was still as ice, bitterly cold. Breathlessly they ran, following the tracks. Halfway his steps diverged and were plainly visible in the virgin snow by themselves. They heard the whispering of the branches ahead of them, for pines cry even when no airs stir. "Follow me close," said the old man sternly. The lantern he already saw lay upon the ground unattended. No human figure was anywhere visible. "See, the steps come to an end here," he whispered, stooping down as soon as they reached the lantern. The tracks, hitherto so regular, showed an odd wavering, the snow curiously disturbed. Quite suddenly they stopped. The final step was a very long one, a stride almost immense. "As though he was pushed forward from behind," muttered the old man, too low to be overheard, "or sucked forward from in front, as in a fall." The girl would have dashed forward but for his strong, restraining grasp. She clutched him, uttering a sudden and dreadful cry. "Hark! I hear his voice!" she almost sobbed. They stood still to listen. A mystery that was more than the mystery of night closed about their hearts. A mystery that is beyond life and death, that only great awe and terror can summon from the depths of the soul. Out of the heart of the trees, 50 feet away, issued a crying voice, half wailing, half singing, very faint. "Help! Help!" it sounded through the still of night. "For the love of God, pray for me!" The melancholy rustling of the pines followed, and then again the singular crying voice shot past above their heads, now in front of them, now once more behind. It sounded everywhere. It grew fainter and fainter, fading away, it seemed, into distance that somehow was appalling. The grove, however, was empty of all but the sighing wind, the snow unbroken by any tread. The moon threw inky shadows. The cold bit. It was a terror of ice and death, and this awful singing cry. "But why, pray?" screamed the girl, distracted, frantic with her bewildered terror. "Why, pray? Let us do something to help. Do something." She swung round in a circle, nearly falling to the ground. Suddenly she perceived that the old man had dropped to his knees in the snow beside her and was praying. "Because the forces of prayer, of thought, of the will to help alone can reach and succour him where he now is," was all the answer she got. And a moment later both figures were kneeling in the snow, praying, so to speak, their very heart's life out. The search may be imagined. The steps taken by police, friends, newspapers, by the whole country in fact. But the most curious part of this queer, higher space adventure is the end of it. At least, the end so far as at present known. For after 3 weeks, when the winds of March were a roar about the land, there crept over the fields towards the house the small, dark figure of a man. He was thin, pallid as a ghost, worn and fearfully emaciated, but upon his face and in his eyes were traces of an astonishing radiance, a glory unlike anything ever seen. It may, of course, have been deliberate, or it may have been a genuine loss of memory only. None could say, least of all the girl whom his return snatched from the gates of death. But, at any rate, what had come to pass during the interval of his amazing disappearance he has never yet been able to reveal. "And you must never ask me," he would say to her. and repeat even after his complete and speedy restoration to bodily health, for I simply cannot tell. I know no language, you see, that could express it. I was near you all the time, but I was also elsewhere and otherwise. The end. That's another one done. That's entrance and exit. And I think we've maybe got time for one more. I mean, by the clock 2, but these are taking a bit longer than 10 minutes, and we kind of have a hard out at 7 o'clock. So, let us pick one. Ooh, let's go for The House of the Past, number 22. Thoughts and prayers? Yes, exactly, indeed. Gave House of Leaves vibes a bit. Yeah, I can see it. I'm a big fan of Blackwood writing about spooky woodlands. That's where we're at. Right. Let's do another one, see how we go. This is number 22, The House of the Past. Also, I've realised, apologies. We do have a fan on. I hope it's not blowing on the microphone. No one's complaining and saying, "Hey, is there a fan on?" I think I'd said already, but I'm not sure. But yeah, it's doing wonders in keeping me cool, but I hope it's not like annoying and distracting anyone. Maybe it's just creating a little bit of windy ambience for everybody to set the scenes for some of these spooky outdoor tales. Who knows? But yes, if we're all ready and sitting comfortably, this may be our last one for this evening. It is number 22. The House of the Past. One night, a dream came to me and brought with her an old and rusty key. She led me across fields and sweet-smelling lanes, where the hedges were already whispering to one another in the dark of the spring, till we came to a huge gaunt house with staring windows and lofty roof half hidden in the shadows of very early morning. I noticed that the blinds were of heavy black, and that the house seemed wrapped in absolute stillness. "This," she whispered in my ear, "is the house of the past. Come with me, and we will go through some of its rooms and passages, but quickly, for I have not the key for long, and the night is very nearly over, yet perchance you shall remember." The key made a dreadful noise as she turned it in the lock, and when the great door swung open into an empty hall and we went in, I heard sounds of whispering and weeping and the rustling of clothes, as of people moving in their sleep and about to wake. Then, instantly, a spirit of intense sadness came over me, drenching me to the soul. My eyes began to burn and smart, and in my heart I became aware of a strange sensation as of the uncoiling of something that had been asleep for ages. My whole being, unable to resist, at once surrendered itself to the spirit of deepest melancholy, and the pain in my heart, as the things moved and woke, became, in a moment of time, too strong for words. As we advanced, the faint voices and sobbings fled away before us into the interior of the house, and I became conscious that the air was full of hands held aloft, of swaying garments, of drooping tresses, and of eyes so sad and wistful that the tears, which were already brimming in my own, held back for wonder at the sight of such intolerable yearning. "Do not allow all this sadness to overwhelm you," whispered the dream at my side. "It is not often they wake. They sleep for years and years and years. The chambers are all full, and unless visitors such as we come to disturb them, they will never wake of their own accord. But when one stirs, the sleep of the others is troubled, and they too awake, till the motion is communicated from one room to another, and thus finally throughout the whole house. Then, sometimes, the sadness is too great to be borne, and the mind weakens. For this reason, memory gives to them the sweetest and deepest sleep she has, and she keeps this old rusty key from little use. But listen now. she added, holding up her hand. "Do you not hear all through the house that trembling in the air like the distant murmur of falling water? And do you not now, perhaps, remember?" Even before she spoke, I had already caught faintly the beginning of a new sound, and now, deep in the cellars beneath our feet, and from the upper regions of the great house as well, I heard the whispering and the rustling and the inward stirring of the sleeping shadows. It rose like a chord swept softly from huge unseen strings stretching somewhere among the foundations of the house, and its tremblings ran greatly through all its walls and ceilings, and I knew that I heard the slow awakening of the ghosts of the past. Ah, me! With what terrible inrushing of sadness I stood with brimming eyes and listened to the faint dead voices of the long ago. For, indeed, the whole house was awakening, and there presently rose to my nostrils the subtle, penetrating perfume of age, of letters long preserved, with ink faded and ribbons pale, of scented tresses, golden and brown, laid away, ah, how tenderly, among pressed flowers that still held the inmost delicacy of their forgotten fragrance, the scented presence of lost memories, the intoxicating incense of the past. My eyes overflowed, my heart tightened and expanded as I yielded myself up without reserve to these old, old influences of sound and smell. These ghosts of the past, forgotten in the tumult of more recent memories, thronged round me, took my hands in theirs, and, ever whispering of what I had so long forgot, ever sighing, shaking from their hair and garment the ineffable odours of the dead ages, led me through the vast house, from room to room, from floor to floor. And the ghosts were not all equally clear to me. Some had indeed but the faintest life, and stirred me so little that they left only an indistinct, blurred impression in the air, while others gazed half reproachfully at me out of faded, colourless eyes, as if longing to recall themselves to my recollection, and then, seeing they were not recognized, floated back gently into the shadows of their room, to sleep again undisturbed till the final day, when I should not fail to know them. "Many of them have slept so long," said the dream beside me, "that they wake only with the greatest difficulty. Once awake, however, they know and remember you, even though you fail to remember them. For it is the rule in this house of the past that, unless you recall them distinctly, remembering precisely when you knew them, and with what particular causes in your past evolution they were associated, they cannot stay awake. Unless you remember them when your eyes meet, unless their look of recognition is returned by you, they are obliged to go back to their sleep, silent and sorrowful, their hands unpressed, their voices unheard, to sleep and dream, deathless and patient, till..." At this moment her words died away suddenly into the distance, and I became conscious of an overpowering sensation of delight and happiness. Something had touched me on the lips, and a strong, sweet fire flashed down into my heart and sent the blood rushing tumultuously through my veins. My pulses beat wildly, my skin glowed, and my eyes grew tender, and the terrible sadness of the place was instantly dispelled as if by magic. Turning with a cry of joy that was at once swallowed up in the chorus of weeping and sighing round me, I looked, and instinctively stretched forth my arms in a rapture of happiness towards a vision of a face, hair, lips, eyes. A cloth of gold lay about the fair neck, and the old, old perfume of the East, ye stars, how long ago, was in her breath. Her lips were again on mine, her hair over my eyes, her arms about my neck, and the love of her ancient soul pouring into mine out of eyes still starry and undimmed. Oh, the fierce tumult, the untold wonder, if I could only remember! That subtle, mist-dispelling odour of many ages ago, once so familiar, before the hills of Atlantis were above the blue sea, or the sands had begun to form the bed of the Sphinx. Yet wait, it comes back. I begin to remember. Curtain upon curtain rises in my soul, and I can almost see beyond. But the hideous stretch of the years, awful and sinister, thousands upon thousands. My heart shakes, and I am afraid. Another curtain rises, and a new vista, farther than the others, comes into view, interminable, running to a point among thick mists. Lo, they too are moving, rising, lightening. At last I shall see. Already I begin to recall the dusky skin, the Eastern grace, the wondrous eyes that held the knowledge of Buddha and the wisdom of Christ before these had even dreamed of attainment. As a dream within a dream, it steals over me again, taking compelling possession of my whole being. The slender form, the stars in that magical eastern sky, the whispering winds among the palm trees, the murmur of the river's waves, and the music of the reeds where they bend and sigh in the shallows on the golden sand. Thousands of years ago, in some aeonian distance. It fades a little and begins to pass, then seems again to rise. Ah, me! That smile of the shining teeth, those lace-veined lids. Oh, who will help me to recall, for it is too far away, too dim, and I cannot wholly remember. Though my lips are still tingling and my arms still outstretched, it again begins to fade. Already there is the look of sadness too deep for words, as she realizes that she is unrecognized. She, whose mere presence could once extinguish for me the entire universe. And she goes back slowly, mournfully, silently to her dim, tremendous sleep, to dream and dream of the day when I must remember her and she must come where she belongs. She peers at me from the end of the room where the shadows already cover her and win her back with outstretched arms to her age-long sleep in the house of the past. Trembling all over, with the strange odour still in my nostrils and the fire in my heart, I turned away and followed my dream up a broad staircase into another part of the house. As we enter the upper corridors, I heard the wind pass singing over the roof. Its music took possession of me until I felt as though my whole body were a single heart, aching, straining, throbbing as if it would break, and all because I heard the wind singing round the house of the past. "But remember," whispered the dream, answering my unspoken wonder, "that you are listening to the song it has sung for untold ages into untold myriad ears. It carries back so appallingly far, and in that simple dirge, profound in its terrible monotony, are the associations and recollections of the joys, griefs, and struggles of all your previous existence. The wind, like the sea, speaks to the inmost memory," she added, "and that is why its voice is one of such deep spiritual sadness. It is the song of things forever incomplete, unfinished, unsatisfying." As we passed through the vaulted rooms, I noticed that no one stirred. There was no actual sound, only a general impression of deep, collective breathing, like the heave of a muffled ocean. But the rooms, I knew at once, were full to the walls, crowded rows upon rows, and from the floors below rose the murmur of the weeping shadows as they returned to their sleep and settled down again in the silence, the darkness, and the dust. The dust. Ah, the dust that floated in this house of the past, so thick, so penetrating, so fine it filled the throat and eyes without pain, so fragrant it soothed the senses and stilled the aching of the heart, so soft it parched the tongue without offence, yet so silently falling, gathering, settling over everything, that the air held it like a fine mist, and the sleeping shadows wore it for their shrouds. And these are the oldest, said my dream, the longest asleep, pointing to the crowded rows of silent sleepers. None here have wakened for ages too many to count, and even if they woke you would not know them. They are, like the others, all your own, but they are the memories of your earliest stages along the great path of evolution. Some day, though, they will wake, and you must know them, and answer their questions, for they cannot die till they have exhausted themselves again through you who gave them birth. Oh, me! I thought, only half listening to or understanding these last words. What mothers, fathers, brothers may then be asleep in this room? What faithful lovers, what true friends, what ancient enemies? And to think that some day they will step forth and confront me, and I shall meet their eyes again, claim them, know them, forgive and be forgiven, the memories of all my past. I turned to speak to the dream at my side, but she was already fading into dimness, and, as I looked again, the whole house melted away into the flush of the eastern sky, and I heard the birds singing, and saw the clouds overhead veiling the stars in the light of coming day. The end. Thank you for listening. And there we go. That's the last of these 10-minute stories, but there are many more. That, funnily enough, I realised halfway through that wasn't actually the one I thought I had picked, which, good job me. No, there's another one, which is also very good. I mean, there's turns out a lot of very good ones in here. But yeah, there's a fair few that I'd prepared that I haven't read today, and plenty others in this book that I've still not read. So yeah, we've got a lot more of these to go, and frankly that bodes well because I really like some of these stories. These are very good, and I had a lot of fun reading them. House of Leaves has ruined your brain because you hear the word house and your brain goes, ooh. Well, I mean, in this one, the house is literally capitalized. It's not like set off from the line and in a different font, but we're 1/3 of the way there. But yes, I also, it's kind of difficult to read the word house without parsing it in a different way. But yes, thank you all for being here. That brings us to the end of the stream. Excuse me, just having a stretch. And we cannot do any more because Lucy and I have a dinner to go to. So, we're going out for dinner. We're not, we're going down John and Margaret's for the dinner this evening. It's going to be lovely.
White
Yes. No, we're just going to dinner. But at a very nice place. So, somewhere we've been before, but yeah. We'll tell you all about it tomorrow, I guess. It would just be the same review as last time. One dinner, please. After we have supped. The dinner, yes, capital T, capital D. Anyway, I'm going to just punt you all over to Dave, who is surely on Search and Filter. He is. Good. There's Dave. Great. So that's where you don't play that with sound. That's where you're going. Lucy will be back tomorrow. I see. You're on his chat, are you? What's that? What's that all about? Right, click. Did that start the raid? That is starting the raid. Good. Great. Cool. Right. Thank you. We shall enjoy dinner. Yeah, Lucy will be back tomorrow with some Sherlock Holmes. So look forward to that. And then we'll be back on Thursday with who knows what a great mystery that we shall all choose ourselves. That'll be fun. So you can look forward to that. But for now, go enjoy Dave and the quizzes and whatever else he's doing after the quizzes. And we're going to go away. Thank you all for being here. Look after yourselves and we'll see you next time. Goodbye. Good night.